Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of the casting of Frank Stone. So for those who want to cross it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game because it's a Steam refund window. Steam says that you should be able to make up your mind whether you want to keep a game or not after that time, and generally speaking I'd agree and say 20 hours in, you're not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short punchy video, keep it around 10 minutes, give you the broad strokes info, and then send you on your way. You can make up your own mind. Okay, so there's a few things to cover here. There's a lot of angles that this is coming from. This studio has a pedigree of making these sort of games, but they've moved to a different publisher, at least for this one, and I have some thoughts around that. It's getting a fair bit of negative or mixed feedback, I noticed, because I was curious because the funny thing is, this has got one of the strongest openings of any of these games that I've seen, and it seems to be a sentiment shared by many others. In fact, that's one of those things. Once I finished my first sort of initial 2 hours of it, I did go check out some reviews, and the cautionary tale seems to be similar to what I'm going to tell you, is that it has a really strong intro, but it may drag as you go on, to the point where some people are arguing that it takes a kind of a sharp turn. Now, I can't comment on that, but I would just say, be careful. You know, in a vacuum, I would probably wholeheartedly recommend this to you based on that first impression. So, okay, a bit of background. Supermassive Games, they bounce around a bit, but you know, they've had a good run with Bandai Namco, I think, with the Dark Pictures anthology. They kind of wrapped that up. They moved on to The Quarry, which, depending on who you ask, might have been a bit of a misstep, but I think people were just comfortable with the anthology series. And now they're doing this, and I don't know enough about the background, whether this is a one-off. I would expect it is, actually, because they're being published by Behaviour Interactive, probably most famously known for Dead by Daylight, which is a bit of a modern phenomenon. I've barely played it, but funnily enough, I've watched a lot of YouTubers in my second window just doing runs through it. I can't explain it. I'm sure there are people out there that are like that watch people play multiplayer games that they personally have no interest in playing, but for whatever reason, I've actually kind of watched a lot of Dead by Daylight secondhand. But regardless, there's no denying it. It's as far as sort of like in recent times as a bit of a modern phenomenon, it's quite a success story. And if you don't even know what that is, the real long short of it is it's an asymmetric horror movie game simulator, but way more in the game department. So it's PvP, where it'll be like a handful of survivor teen type players trying to escape or, you know, complete mission objectives while some prick killer's going around trying to kill them. One of which I think must be this Frank Stone dude. Now, I don't know any of the lore, but it is very apparent to me that this game is riddled with Easter eggs, and it's actually kind of jarring because I recognize some stuff, like the QuickTime events in this are the same as the QuickTime events from the game. That's very clever. And there's this like sort of fire footprint scratch thing people leave in the game, and that's in here as well. So I recognize some things, but it's so obvious that so much of the knickknacks and kind of a big part of the depth of this game, because it's so gameplay light, a lot of it is just wandering around picking up shit and having a look at it, and honestly, it feels like maybe a quarter of that stuff seems to be about progressing the narrative, like it'll be some file about employees with history of being prisoners or some such, right? It'll be something that enhances the narrative on an internal level, but then the other 75% of all the other crap that you're picking up is stuff that's flying over my head, but I can at least tell these are clearly winks and nods to Dead by Daylight. So this will cut two ways. One, you're a Dead by Daylight fan and this is great and it's building out that universe for you. Or two, you're like me and it very quickly starts to really put the value question of the game on the table. When you start to realize that, like, I can confidently say, of all of these sort of games, especially out of Supermassive specifically, this is probably the gameplay weakest so far. It's very derivative and very narrow in your interaction with it. And so when you couple that with the collectibles, arguably faux gameplay, but something that you would use to justify a price tag for padding out gameplay, and most of this crap means nothing to me, it does wear you down and it starts to skew towards, is this worth your money? Now, I will marry that in and say, as I've hinted to before, the story and the way that they're slow burn telling it at the moment is really interesting and really compelling. Arguably more than other things that they've previously done. Now, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the sort of anthology games, but they moved at a bit more of a clip. This feels like maybe it's got a little bit more time to breathe. But again, of course, there's been a lot of reports that maybe it sort of drops it in the second and third act. But as far as the intro, it's split across multiple timelines, and I'm compelled. I am curious as to where it's going. So this is very difficult to recommend. It's going to come down to take my info and figure out where you sit on the scale. Because, yeah, narratively, seemingly the strongest. The graphics are really kind of cool when they work. I'm on a 40 series, a YouTuber PC basically that can run everything, run Avatar, run all the prettiest games that there are. And yet this thing has been fighting me with both hands on almost every setting I've tried. Something to do with caching textures, or I can't be 100% sure, but I could get it running all right on medium. But there's lots of pop in when it jumps between scenes and angles, and I can't help but think that as the game ramps up and you're going to get into more quick time or the character dies events and jump scares and that, these performance issues would normally not be a big deal in most games, where maybe as you load into a level you have a bit of pop in for a second or two, but it keeps happening in this as you jump scenes and camera angles and all that. It's kind of frustrating. And the real tragedy is, like, when it does get past those bumps on Ultra, it looks really good. And I wouldn't say it looks bad on medium, but you do lose a lot of the facial details. And again, this particular style of game, it really hangs its hat on it. It's always been such a phenomenon, hasn't it? Like, even the Telltale games were plagued with it. These gameplay light, narrative heavy games, I don't want to sound cruel, but I feel like there's a certain B grade quality of technical programmer that works on these projects, because that is always the same issue. Like, the game is not strictly demanding, and it's not even mechanically super well realized. It is very akin to a walking simulator, very light on, and yet they are often some of the most plagued and broken games. But anyway, as I don't want to necessarily paint this with all of that brush, but I will say, as far as system optimization, I shouldn't be having problems with this, and yet I'm having more problems with this than most any other game that I've covered recently. But yeah, so the narrative is cool, and what little they've slow burnt metered out, I won't give away. All the characters are really interesting. There's this dickhead with a man bun who, immediately, he should be on my bingo card for most hated person. And yet I think he's my favorite character. Stan the man. He's odd and all over the place. And it's actually one of the really cool things. Now, how do I verbalize this? I despise all the Joss Whedon dialogue shit that was at once a niche gimmick for losers that said shiny to each other as a dog whistle, and now has become sort of how mainstream humor is conveyed all through, like the Avengers movies and that sort of stuff. And I kind of really hate it. This sardonic, almost kind of meta, too cool for school, everything's got to be a joke. And something that I've found with these characters is they're not leveraging any of that. The game, even with the bubbly ditz director making this movie, or Stan, the sort of fast-talking kind of wanker dude bro straight out of a bloody 2003 movie sort of thing, like, their personalities stand apart from what I would say is the way character writing has destroyed almost every modern property. So everything is played straight, and it feels kind of refreshing and throwback to a time where I would say writing was more earnest. So yeah, some of these characters are kind of wankers and you're not necessarily supposed to like them. It's more that they're written intentionally like that. Anyway, look, again, it's hard to make too much of a analysis this early in, but that's one thing that struck me, is that this is sort of refreshingly 10 years ago in the character writing and portrayal, and again, it's all played very straight, not where can I squeeze a fucking Avengers joke in to break the tension. But yeah, the gameplay it's really, really derivative, right? You move around in a little space and you pick up and look at crap and trinkets that mean nothing to you if you're not a fan, and then you'll go to an earmarked talk to this person or open this door and it will have a different thing. So indicating to hold the button down, and that will now move you on from that scene and you can't come back. And so this is how it's interspersed, and then it'll play out essentially a cutscene. You'll have an either or choice, and that's pretty much the king's share of how this game plays. There are a few quick times and all that, and again, given that it's a slasher type game, it's probably going to ramp up as it goes, but the king's share of it is actually as derivative as I've explained it to you to be. So yeah, it's tough, and look, I don't want to seem fickle or anything like that, because I kind of took Hellblade to task, for example, but I didn't find the sort of meandering, talking to yourself, bullshit, poor me core of what they were trying to build a narrative on to be even remotely compelling. Whereas this, I found really compelling. So I guess that's the differences. I have my biases and I try to be aware of them. But yeah, this, unless you're listening to this and you're nodding along and you're like, yeah, actually, I really do want to give a movie horror video game a go that is earnest and it looks like it actually might be fairly well written, but it's probably one of the worst gameplay examples of the lot of them. You know, if you can reconcile that, fill your boots. Otherwise, I'd probably say put it on a wish list or something like that and pick it up on the cheap. Or even, you know, look into their back catalogue, right? Check out all the other Supermassive stuff as well and figure it out for yourself. But yeah, like, truth be told, I'm sitting on the copy. I'm already 2 hours in and I've enjoyed it. I'll probably chip away at it myself in my own time and see it through, because I am personally quite enjoying what I've seen here. Faults and all. Anyway, team, I might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.